The Stonewall Riots were one of the most important moments in history and changed the world forever. But how did they start? Why were they so important? And what are the lasting effects of this pivotal moment in history? Remember Stonewall with the Stonewall Inn brick set, complete with over 770 Lego pieces, a rainbow flag outside, and the official Powered by Rainbows film set inside the building. Get it now at ProfessorPride.com, along with all the accessories you'll need for Pride this year, including buttons, magnets, stickers, jewelry, cloth fans, digital downloads, and LGBTQ books. It's all available right now at ProfessorPride.com. In order to understand the events at Stonewall, we first have to go back to 1714, before the United States of America was even founded. In that year, a new sodomy law was put in place in the early colonies, making it illegal to be gay in the New World. If you've learned from our other LGBTQ history episodes on this channel, this is where you might point out the first president of the United States was a gay man named George Washington. He hired another gay man named Baron Friedrich von Steuben to lead his infantry, and an intersex man named Casimir Pulaski to lead his cavalry to win the American Revolution. So Americans really only have LGBTQ people to thank for having a country at all. But the fact is, the USA was founded upon homophobia, which meant from day one of the USA being a country, you could still be jailed just for being gay or transgender back in the 1770s and 80s. For the next 200 years, tensions were rising between LGBTQ people and the government of the United States. Just as some examples here, in 1924, the Society for Human Rights was founded. This was the first gay rights organization in the world, and it ceased to exist a few years later, after most of its members were arrested for being gay. After World War II ended in 1945, soldiers came home to their countries around the world and were welcomed with open arms. But for LGBTQ soldiers who risked their lives too, they were shunned by their hometowns. This happened so much that LGBTQ people band together and created what we now call gayborhoods, where LGBT people lived together, could talk openly about being gay or trans, and could love one another freely without fear of being arrested in their own homes. This is the era where the gay hanky code came into popular society. If you wore the correct color hanky in your back pocket, it was safe to talk to you. If not, you could be a policeman trying to go undercover and arrest LGBTQ people for being gay or trans. But even in these gayborhoods, LGBTQ people were still breaking the law at the time, just by being gay or trans. And this opened the door to the actual Mafia, who saw this as an opportunity.
I'm gonna make him an offer again with you.
Although nowadays it's a joke about the alphabet mafia, back in those days it was the actual mafia that helped LGBTQ people live freely. The Mafia created bars across the country in these gayborhoods, buying up cheap real estate and serving as a meeting place for LGBTQ people. The drinks or food at these places were massively overpriced, and it was still a massive risk for LGBTQ people to go to one of these bars, because police would routinely raid the establishment and arrest any LGBTQ person inside. The Mafia tried to combat this by bribing local officials and police officers to stop the raids from happening. And while the bribes sometimes worked, other times the police would just take the money and still raid the bar, arresting everyone inside. The Mafia had massive expenses in bribing local officials and police officers, which is why they say the food and drinks at these places were so expensive. Over time, LGBTQ people got sick and tired of the police and the Mafia. They were tired of the police coming in and arresting them for being gay or trans, but they were also tired of the Mafia for overcharging them for drinks and food with the promise of protecting them, but not really actually protecting them in these establishments. Our community got so sick and tired of both of these parties mistreating them that in 1955 in Baltimore, Maryland, at the Pepper Hill Club, it was the first recorded case of LGBTQ people standing up and fighting back against the police, but still 162 people were arrested that night. This happened again in February of 1956 at Hazel's Inn in Sharp Park, California. Again in 1959 at Cooper's Donuts in Los Angeles, California. In 1961 at Black Knight Brawl in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And 1966 at Compton's Cafeteria in San Francisco, California. At all of these places, LGBTQ people stood up and didn't allow the police to just arrest them for being themselves. That brings us to the Stonewall Inn, which was owned by the Mafia in a neighborhood called Greenwich Village in New York City. It was raided by the police usually about once per month, where the police came in with riot gear on and arrested every LGBTQ person they could find. Usually the police raided the Stonewall and left it go for another month. But tensions were still rising between the government and LGBTQ people. Our community tried protesting peacefully and were arrested for it. We tried going to our own neighborhoods and our own bars, and were still arrested. As President John F. Kennedy once said, quote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." That statement was never more true than in the early morning hours of June 28, 1969. The Stonewall Inn was already raided by the police earlier in the week, so LGBTQ people thought it was safe to go to the Stonewall again for another month until police returned. However, police raided again on June 28, 1969. As police were arresting LGBTQ people, a fight broke out between the patrons and the police. Some say a transgender woman named Marsha P. Johnson threw the first brick at the police,
My leg!
which began the defensive fight. But Marsha later said she wasn't the first to fight back. In fact, no one really knows for certain who threw the first brick, or even if a brick was thrown at all. All we know for certain is that LGBTQ patrons stood their ground and fought back in force. Some LGBTQ people were still arrested, but it was far fewer than the police wanted. In the middle of this chaotic fight, a hero named Craig Rodwell and his partner Fred Sargent just happened to be walking by the Stonewall Inn on their way home. Already a gay rights organizer, Craig joined in the fight and started chanting, "Gay power!" which roared through the LGBTQ people rising up to police. Craig and Fred then escaped the bar to a payphone outside and started calling the press. They called the New York Times, New York Post, and the New York Daily News, among others. But none of them wanted to cover the event, simply because raids on gay bars were all too common in those days, and they didn't consider it newsworthy. The only news outlet to actually respond to Craig's phone call was an alternative newspaper called The Village Voice, which is sadly no longer in existence. The Village Voice had the exclusive on the most pivotal moment of 1969. Possibly the best way to understand the significance of this moment is to try to imagine all of the media outlets, newspapers, TV shows, and so on in New York City not wanting to cover the September 11th, 2001 attacks on America. Imagine yourself as the reporter on the sidelines, watching the most pivotal moment of the entire year, if not the decade, happening right before you, and you're the only reporter there to cover it. After the police left, Craig and Fred prepared a leaflet denouncing the police and the Mafia, and organized a peaceful protest outside of Stonewall Inn for the next 5 days. During this time, they distributed over 5,000 copies of their, quote, "Get the Mafia and Cops Out of Gay Bars" flyer around New York City. In November of 1969, something amazing happened from this tragedy so far. Craig Rodwell opened his apartment on Bleecker Street in New York City to a meeting with 3 other people, one of which was his partner in life and activism, Fred Sargent. The second was Ellen Broidy, who was the president of the Student Homophile League that later became the NYU Gay Student Liberation Organization. And third was Linda Rhodes, who was Ellen's partner in life and activism. These 4 people proposed the idea of an annual celebration to remember what happened at Stonewall Inn on June 28, 1969. Craig, Fred, Ellen, and Linda organized the first annual celebration, which took place on the street in front of Stonewall Inn. They called it the Christopher Street Liberation Day, and it took place on June 28, 1970. The following year, in 1971, it was expanded to a few more cities, and soon it was named Pride. All Pride celebrations, parades, and protests since 1970 in hundreds of other cities worldwide owe their start to the Stonewall Riots in 1969, and these four incredible heroes who founded the first ever Pride. In 2003, actions of same-sex loving individuals were finally legalized in the United States, thanks to the ruling from the Supreme Court on Lawrence v. Texas. And on June 26, 2015, same-sex marriage was legalized in the United States too, thanks to the ruling on Obergefell v. Hodges. But both of these monumental cases also owe their start to Stonewall Riots and the LGBTQ people who stood up for their rights in 1969. On June 24, 2016, President Barack Obama officially designated Christopher Park, immediately in front of Stonewall Inn, a national monument, ensuring the history and significance can be preserved for generations to come.
So this week, I'm designating the Stonewall National Monument as the newest addition to America's national park system. Stonewall will be our first national monument to tell the story of the struggle for LGBT rights. I believe our national park should reflect the full story of our country, the richness and diversity and uniquely American spirit that has always defined us, that we are stronger together, that out of many, we are one.
The building immediately beside the Stonewall Inn is also a part of this national monument. It is currently under remodel to tell the story of the Stonewall Riots when you go there, but it is said to be opening in June of 2024. The bar itself is still privately owned and was bought in 2006 by Kurt Kelly and Stacy Lentz, who run an initiative to preserve the history of the building. You can visit the Stonewall Inn and the National Monument outside in the park anytime you're in Greenwich Village in New York City. For even more LGBTQ history and educational episodes, be sure to subscribe to our channel. And for LGBTQ resources, check out ProfessorPride.com. As always, I am your host, Professor Pride. Have a gay day, everyone, and bye for now.